Hello and welcome back to Chapter 10. We are still talking about the HIPAA privacy rule and moving on to Section 3 that starts on the bottom of page 215. We're going to get into some HIPAA terminology. Now, in addition to understanding who and what HIPAA privacy rule applies to, there's some additional terms of art that further explain the rule's applicability. Now, these include individuals, personal representatives, the designated record set, disclosure, use, and request, treatment, payment, operations, and then we're going to talk about a few types of organizations that are recognized by HIPAA. All right, so our first term is individual. Well, the HIPAA privacy rule does not use the terminology of patient or client. They use the term individual. So an individual is the person who is the actual subject of the PHI. So in our terms, it's our patient or our client, but to HIPAA, it is the individual. So whoever the health record is about, that is the HIPAA individual. Okay, then we have personal representative. Now, this personal representative is gives a little more clarity through the privacy rule because this is a person that has legal authority to act on behalf of another adult, an emancipated minor, an unemancipated minor, or a deceased individual. So they are treated as the personal representative under the privacy rule. Now, the personal representative must be treated the same as the individual regarding the use and disclosure of the individual's PHI. Okay, so when we look at a personal representative, let's say we have a personal representative, a husband and a wife. If that personal representative goes in and asks for a copy of the individual's medical records, then that should be released because, again, they're looked at as the same. They're treated the same. Now, there's some things that we've talked about in previous chapters that throw a little caveat into this personal representative business. So, again, although parents are generally going to be their children's personal representatives, especially with minor children, but if the child has signed off on their own treatment, consented to their own treatment, then that parent is no longer a personal representative of that child. So some of those conditions that we talked about in the past, if they're going in and getting treatment for an STD, if they're going in for drug abuse or alcohol abuse related treatment, then they can consent for their own treatment. At that point, parents are not personal representatives. And then another caveat here, we gave you the example of a husband and a wife. If there is suspected abuse or neglect of the individual, then the personal representative rights, they would endanger that person. So let's say that wife goes to the hospital and she says that her husband has been abusing her and he's her personal representative and he goes to the hospital and he requests her medical records. There is possible endangerment to that wife if that hospital releases that medical record stating that she said he abuses her. So they will not actually give those records out. They would deny that personal representative at that point. Okay, so next term, designated record set. So we did talk about this in Chapter 9. Designated record set. The privacy rule allows individuals to inspect, obtain a copy, and amend information in their designated record set, including information that exists in paper, that's imaged, and in electronic forms. So, of course, we talked about a designated record set being medical records. It could be the billing records. It could be enrollment, payment, claims adjudication, and case or medical management. So anything that covered entity would use to make decisions for that patient. So again, we're not just talking about the legal health record. We're not just talking about the medical information. We're talking about all of it, financial, health, insurance information. All right, dropping down to disclosure, use, and request. Now, within the privacy rule, we have 3 types of situations in which PHI is handled: disclosure, use, and request. Now, disclosure is divulging, releasing, or disseminating information about the identifiable person by that covered entity or the business associate to another entity or a person outside of the entity holding the information. Okay? So disclosure is I'm giving it to somebody else, another hospital, another physician's office. I'm giving it to a lawyer. I'm giving it to an insurance company. Okay? Now, use is sharing the employment, the application, the utilization, examination, or analysis of the individually identifiable health information within the entity that maintains the information. Okay? So if I am a utilization review nurse and I'm reviewing a chart as part of my job, and if I am a HIM professional and I'm going to our medical executive committee and I'm talking about the number of delinquent history and physicals, or I'm talking about the number of op reports that weren't completed within a timely time frame, then that's using the information, because again, I'm inside the organization. So disclosure is sending the information outside of the organization, giving it to another covered entity. Use is keeping that information inside. You're using it to complete your day-to-day job. Okay, and the last one is request. So covered entities must also comply with the privacy rule when they request PHI. A request for PHI is made by a covered entity or its business associate. Now, of the 3, the privacy rule emphasizes disclosure and use. Okay, dropping down to the next one, treatment, payment, and operations. You'll see this referenced as TPO. Now, the HIPAA privacy rule, it gets that there are certain functions that these hospitals or covered entities, they have to perform. So it's not their intent to hinder the functions. Okay, they're not trying to make it hard for these covered entities. They want to protect the patients, but they do understand that covered entities have to perform their core business. So let's get into each one of these. Treatment. Okay, treatment can be providing, coordinating, managing healthcare, or services that you would actually receive. Okay, so you go to the hospital and you go to the ED and you're seen in the emergency department, or you go to an office and you're seen by your physician. Those are treatment. So treatment in the privacy rule definition also covers your healthcare provider consultations relating to a patient, or the referral of a patient for health care from one provider to another. So treatment is just what it sounds like. It's treatment. It's being seen by a provider, being seen by a hospital. Okay, then we have payment. This is another broad set of activities. So it could be talking about the activities of a health plan to obtain their premiums, or the activities by a healthcare provider to obtain reimbursement. And so we're talking about billing, claims management, claims collection, review of medical necessity, utilization review. Those are all under payment. Okay, and then we have healthcare operations. This is the one that is more along the lines with the use. You're using the information because you're completing your job. So we're talking about quality assessment and quality improvement, case management, review of healthcare professionals' qualifications, insurance contracting, legal and auditing functions, and then just general business management functions. You know, if I'm creating a new document in the electronic record and it's going to cross over into my document imaging system, you know, I don't necessarily know who these patients are, but I still have to go look at their record to ensure that that document is being sent into that document management system. So I may look at 1,500 documents on 1,500 patients. I'm not doing it just to see who the patients are or what's going on with them. I'm doing it as part of my due diligence as being that system administrator and ensuring that the documentation is crossing correctly and ensuring that the format is readable in the document management system. So you've got a lot of different healthcare operations that fall in there. All right, last slide that we're going to talk about in this section is our different organization types. So covered entity is a term of art under the privacy rule, and it generally encompasses the neatly defined categories of healthcare providers, health plans, and healthcare clearinghouses. Remember, that's our big three, the big three categories. However, these categories are neither mutually exclusive nor all-inclusive. For an example, an organization may function as a covered entity in one aspect of its business, but not another. And so then we've got these three different types to talk about. Actually, four. So first, let's talk about a hybrid entity. Okay, well, a hybrid entity performs both covered and non-covered functions of the privacy rule. Okay, let's think about that for a second. So what was our exception? We'll split back in our chapter here. If we go back to the not the very first section, the second section, it's on page 215, right before we got to today's section, but it was talking about how educational records are excluded. So employment records and educational records, they're excluded from the privacy rule. So what would a hybrid entity possibly be? Well, think about UMMC and think about UAB. Those are some that are close to home. Those universities that are teaching and also are a hospital, okay? So your university medical school type situations, those are called hybrid entities because on one hand, they are an educational facility. So you maintain student educational records there. You may have the students' health records where they had to have certain immunizations. And then you also actually have medical records on your hospital side where you're truly treating patients. So those student records that are maintained, those educational records, they're not covered by the privacy rule, so those records are exempt. They're not going to be released. And then you have your health records over on the medical side. Those are released. Those are covered by the privacy rule. So hybrid entities are your educational institutions, okay? All right, next, affiliated covered entity. So this refers to a legally separate covered entities affiliated by common ownership or control. Now, for purposes of the privacy rule, these legal separate entities may refer to themselves as a single covered entity. So let's think about that for a second. So it said legally separate covered entities affiliated by common ownership or control. So who could that be? Okay, that is going to be your Baptist organizations, and that is going to be North Mississippi Health Services. North Mississippi Health Services includes North Mississippi Medical Center, North Mississippi Medical Center Pontotoc, North Mississippi Medical Center West Point, North Mississippi Medical Center, Hamilton, Alabama, and so on. So they're all their own legal entities. They all have their own tax ID numbers. They're all their own organizations, but they're affiliated with North Mississippi Health Services. So a lot of times we look at North Mississippi Health Services as one entity, but technically it's several different legally on their own operated entities but they come together under that one umbrella. Okay, let's talk about an organized healthcare arrangement. Now, this is characterized by two or more covered entities who share PHI to manage and benefit their common enterprise, and they're technically recognized by the public as a single entity. Okay, so this one might be a little more tricky, but think about that for a second. An organized healthcare arrangement characterized by two or more covered entities who share PHI to manage and benefit their common enterprise. Who could that be? Okay, think about it this way. Think about the Women's Hospital here in Tupelo. Think about Sanders Clinic here in Tupelo. And think about OBGYN Associates here in Tupelo. This is an organized healthcare arrangement because the Women's Hospital is its own covered entity. Sanders Clinic is its own covered entity. And OBGYN Associates are its own covered entity. So we're talking about a hospital and then separated physician practices that go into those hospitals. They have privileges there. They're sharing the PHI to take care of that patient. Okay, so Sanders Clinic having that relationship with the Women's Hospital and OBGYN Associates having that relationship with the hospital, that makes that an organized healthcare arrangement. Okay, so Sanders Clinic can take care of patients in their office. They can't deliver babies in their office, so they have to send their patients to the hospital where they go take care of those patients there. So that's your organized healthcare arrangement. Now you can use that same scenario with larger hospitals. Like you could talk about the hospital in Tupelo, and you could talk about all of the different orthopedic doctors. So you have two main orthopedic groups here in Tupelo. Cardiology there's a monopoly there in cardiology in Tupelo. You have a monopoly on urology, but those are still organized healthcare arrangements. Those urologists are coming into the Tupelo, sharing PHI with the hospital and with their office to take care of that one patient. All right, and that last little paragraph there. So it says, finally, covered entities may perform multiple covered functions. They must operate each covered function separately and must not disclose PHI to a function not involved with the individual, remaining compliant with the privacy rule relative to each function they perform. For example, a medical facility may also be a self-insured health plan. If an employee of the medical facility is a patient but not an enrollee of the health plan, that individual's PHI may only be used by the medical facility in its capacity as a healthcare provider and cannot be shared with the health plan. So North Mississippi Health Services was its own self-insured health plan. They provided the insurance, and it was just operated by a third party called a claim. So if I am not part of the health plan and I'm on, let's say, my husband's insurance, then they can only use my information in a health care provider capacity. They cannot send my information to their health plan. Okay, so again, you may be covering several functions as your own entity, but you have to keep those pieces separated. All right, so again, I wanted to keep these short and sweet. So let's do the check your understanding really quick, and we'll wrap up section 3. So number 1, use is the sharing of individually identifiable health information within an entity. That is true. Within, you're using the information. If you're sending it outside, you are disclosing the information. Number 2, under the privacy rule, a personal representative must be treated the same as an individual regarding the use and disclosure of the individual's PHI. That is true. In most cases, where it is a true personal representative situation, they are treated no differently than the individual. Number 3, a university with a medical center is a hybrid entity under the privacy rule. That is true. Number 4, Some of the privacy rules requirements are relaxed or removed where PHI is needed for purposes of TPO. That is true. Remember, we talked about how the privacy rule was not trying to impede a health organization from doing their business. So some of those rules are removed or relaxed when it comes to TPO. And then number 5, by definition, a designated record set excludes billing records. That is false. We've talked about that in Chapter 9, and we talked about it on the previous page, that your designated record set is going to include anything that the covered entity used to make decisions about that patient. So we're talking medical records, billing records, everything. All right, so that finishes up section 3. We have 2 more sections to cover in this chapter. I will record those this week. So happy reading and happy studying of Chapter 10 in the Privacy Rule.